All right, so let's talk about how to measure the infrasternal angle, because I definitely have screwed this up before. I know a lot of other people have as well. So I'm going to come off the sternum. I want to find the xiphoid. That's my vertex point. So I'm going to come off it just slightly when we get into soft tissue. From there, I'm going to come inside and hook this side of the false ribs and then the other side of the false ribs. And that'll give you your presentation of what you see here. Greg would be like in asymmetry, so narrow on the left, a little bit wider on the right, a normal asymmetry, but still asymmetrical nonetheless. The way people will screw this up is they'll come off here and they'll use this as their sort of their measurement point, and then you think, oh, he's really wide both ways. But if you actually are looking at the true infrasternal angle, we're going to come off the sternum onto the xiphoid. It's pretty pokey there, pointy. And I come inside, drop right on top of it, and Greg is going to be narrow on the left, and then maybe a little bit narrow, but on the right as well. But narrow overall, definitely less than 90 degrees total. Okay, so this can be kind of confusing, so let's model it real quickly. So rotation is not tilt, and tilt is not rotation. This is rotation, so that's anterior rotation, posterior rotation. This is anterior tilt, posterior tilt. So I can be in an anterior rotation, but I can be in a posterior tilt. I can be in a posterior tilt, but in an anterior rotation. You have to think of the sacrum can move independently, although very little, independently of the innominate. Cool. So normal skeletal mechanics with inhalation, with taking breath in. So diaphragm drops, the pleural pressure, the pressure in my lung, in my thoracic cavity decreases. That allows, pressure moves from high to low, so air comes in and pressurizes my thoracic cavity. As my diaphragm's dropping down, then it's going to create pressure. It's going to push my guts down into the pelvic cavity. For that to occur appropriately, we need expansion of the posterior mediastinum. I need a pump handling of my true ribs on the sternum here, and we can't quite tell from this angle here, it's a side angle, but I should get a bucket handle of my false ribs, so they kind of come out in this position here. So anteriorly, I get the pump handle. On the side here, I get this bucket handle. Posteriorly, in the posterior mediastinum, my thoracic curve should kyphose, or should increase. I'm getting a slight decrease in my lumbar lordosis, and then here I get an actual counter nutation of my sacrum, which looks kind of like this here. For that to occur, I also get an anterior rotation of my innominate, so that flexion, abduction, external rotation. Anterior rotation, not tilt. Good. Cool. All right. So let's say this is modeled after my infrasternal angle, the false ribs, the area that we're measuring. This is normal mechanics. My infrasternal angle should be the opposite of my infrapubic angle. So when air comes in, I get an expansion. I get that bucket handling action at my false ribs, so it kind of goes out that way, out that way. That allows my diaphragm to drop. When my diaphragm drops, it allows me to push my guts straight down into the pelvic cavity. When my guts get pushed down in my pelvic cavity, I need, again, that narrow infrapubic angle, which we're talking about right here, this measurement here. When that narrows, my pelvic floor should descend to allow my guts to come down. This is normal mechanics. In normal mechanics, my infrasternal angle should be opposite of my infrapubic angle. Okay, so let's start talking about when things get messed up. Let's talk about the spine in a wide infrasternal angle, meaning larger than 90 degrees, probably 110, 120 in the infrasternal angle. If that occurs, what's going to happen is I'm going to get an increase in all my spinal curves. I'm going to get an increase in my thoracic kyphosis, an increase in my lumbar lordosis, and instead of having counter nutation in my sacrum, I'm going to have nutation in my sacrum. So what ends up happening is I get into a position like so. So the sacrum actually will come back this way. If my sacrum nutates back this way, that's going to cause a resultant increased lumbar lordosis right there. That increased then thoracic kyphosis. So we get an increase of our spinal curves all the way throughout. Typically, what you'll see with a wide infrasternal angle is they're really good at getting air in that posterior area there. So they blow air, creating a low pressure environment here, be able to get air here, but then they lose the ability to pump handle or get air anteriorly most of the time. So here's where the mechanics get screwed up. Let's get a little more specific now. So wide infrasternal angle. So I have a wide infrasternal angle, meaning my ribs are stuck, my false ribs are stuck in a bucket handle position, a position of inhalation. So my thoracic diaphragm then is overly flattened. The result of that then typically is I'm going to get a wide infrapubic angle. So as my thoracic diaphragm flattens, my guts need to get pushed down into this infrapubic angle. But we remember from these two measures should match. So if they do match, then I've got, what's the problem is I'm going to get a pelvic floor then that's going to get in an ascended position. So it's basically smashing guts, right? There's no position for my guts to be able to drive there. So there has to be some sort of pressure leak. I'm going to make all sorts of different compensations, but one you might see is someone just take a breath in and get a huge belly expansion because there's no position for their guts to get down, push down into that infrapubic angle. So you get a driving maybe anteriorly of air expressed that way instead of it being pushed straight down. So wide infrasternal angle, wide infrasternal angle, wide infrapubic angle. These two measures should not match on inhalation. So let's talk about narrow infrasternal angle. So it's going to be opposite of the wide. So I get a decrease in my thoracic kyphosis, I get a decrease in my lumbar lordosis. I basically get a flattened spine. I'm usually typically very good at getting air into that front of that chest, but have a very difficult time getting air in my posterior mediastinum. So you can think about like the resultant positions that my scapula would get in. So if I take a breath in and I get this decent pump handle action, what that's going to do is it's going to flatten my thoracic spine. If I flatten my thoracic spine, you can think about where the scapula sit. Oftentimes then they're going to adduct towards the center of the spine. So you'll lose resulting shoulder range of motion because of that. What you also have with the narrow infrasternal angle is a counternutated sacrum, because you're going to have a narrow infrapubic angle. So that counternutated sacrum looks like so. So counternutated sacrum here, my infrapubic angle then gets narrow. So then let's move into our infrasternal angle or infrapubic angle with the narrows. So again, this is faulty mechanics right here, right? So we have an infrasternal angle that's super narrow, now matches my infrapubic angle on inhalation. The problem with that is when you have a narrow infrasternal angle, the diaphragm mechanics sort of invert and it gives my external obliques leverage. That's going to really straighten my ribs out, and that's going to create almost an overly flattened diaphragm. So I've got a diaphragm that really can't descend anymore when I take air in, and I got an infrapubic angle that is now super narrow. So when I have a narrow infrapubic angle like that, my pelvic floor, you think like of a trampoline, my pelvic floor just sits in a droopy position here. So I get really no position, no change of pressure in my thoracic, my pelvic guts, pelvic diaphragm. So let's go over how we're going to get after a wide infrasternal angle. So if we think about those false ribs, they're wide, they're probably overly bent in this sort of position like this. So what we need to do is we need to get them to straighten out a little bit. The best thing we can do there is we can try to get some external obliques to fire. The way we do that is with forceful exhalations. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my arms overhead to put my viscera and my abdominals on a little better stretch reflex position so I can get them to fire even harder. So what I'm going to do is I'll go feet on a box. See if I can find some hamstrings, a little bit of a posterior tilt, kind of scoop my pelvis slightly off the ground. I'm going to get my arms overhead, quiet breath in, and then big exhale out. All the way out, quiet breath in, all the way out. One more time, all the way in, all the way out. So it's super important at the end of that exhale is to pause for a couple seconds, give that overly flattened diaphragm a chance to sort of redome and get into a better position before you kick back into that next breath. Again, the big exhales are trying to get your external obliques to take those overly bent ribs, externally rotate them, open them up just a little bit so that you can get that transverse abdominis and an internal oblique to pick up leverage to be proper exhalation muscles. So one more time, arms overhead, big exhales, trying to get external obliques to fire. Okay, so now let's go after the narrows. So the narrow infrasternal angles are going to have too much external oblique. So they've got these straightened, externally rotated false ribs. So what we need to do then is we need to use a muscle that's on the front of the rib cage that can take this overly overly A to P thorax and try to bring it back and try to bend these ribs a little bit. So what we're going to use here is we're going to try to get pec. So we need a lot of pec in order to get that position like this, and then bring them into a position like that. So what we can do is we'll go on all fours typically. Remember, these people typically have a harder time getting air into their posterior mediastinum, posterior back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my shoulders into a little bit of like an internally rotated diamond position here. I'm going to give myself a little bit of a posterior tilt, so I want to increase my spinal curves and come over the top slightly, get out of my psoas and bring myself a little more forward. From here, the breath is going to be in quiet, and then it's going to be fogging, nice easy exhale. Pushing through the ground. So I should feel my pecs are firing as I push through the ground. One more time. The reason I want that nice easy exhale is because I don't want to get the big external obliques to fire. They're already in too much of a piece of a leverage. What I need pecs in order to take that A to P thorax and bring it back into a nice rounded position. Again, I'm trying to drive air into that posterior mediastinum to see if I can get air driving back there, which then help hopefully get my scapula in a little better position. If you think about it, right, if I take that, if I'm in normal narrow infrasternal angle and I get a flattened thoracic spine, my scapula want to adduct towards the center. So what I'm going to do then is obviously I'm going to push away from the ground. That gets my scapula protracted a little bit, and I'm getting air into that posterior mediastinum back area, allowing my scapula to go from here back into a kind of a nice position like that, and then taking that narrow thorax from here and bringing me back here using my pecs. So what if I have an asymmetrical infrasternal angle? So what you typically see with a narrow or with an asymmetrical infrasternal angle is you're going to be narrow on the left and a little bit wider on the right. So what you want to do is you want to go up to that narrow side first. The reason being is because you've got external obliques concentrically in a position of leverage, and with my breathing patterns, I want that if I go after the wide first and I go with a hard exhale, all I'm going to continue to do is drive those ribs that are already narrow and already straight into that continued position of leverage. So what I want to do is I want to go with the soft fogging exhale, going after that left narrow infrasternal angle. So I'm going to go on my back. I'm going to get after that left infrasternal angle. So I'm going to give that little bit of pelvic tilt. Nice position here. Feel my hamstrings, and I'm just going to reach with that left hand. So I'm trying to drive air back behind that left shoulder. In through your nose, fogging exhale out. I want that pec to take that narrow A to P side and start rounding it out a little more. One more time, in through my nose. Fogging, sighing, breath out. Nice, easy breath out. So, say I normalize that left infrasternal angle and I take it from that really straight position, I bend it a little bit, but I still maybe have a little bit of a wide position on the right. From there, then we can attack both at the same time. So I'll go back into that all fours position here, and from here, I'm going to try to get air in that upper left back here, left posterior mediastinum, a little bit of a pelvic tilt, and I'm going to reach with the right hand. So now I'm getting air here, and then in my front of my chest, in the right shoulder here, trying to get external obliques to fire. So I'm killing two birds with one stone, if you will. So in through my nose, stick with the sort of fogging exhale, don't need to over exhale. Like so. So air gets back here, and it gets here. So hopefully then I'm taking that narrow infrasternal angle I had on the left and keeping it in a good position. And now I have that wide, overly bent, wide right side, and I'm trying to straighten it out, bring it over the top. Back that up, check your shoulder measures, check your hip measures, check to see what changed, if you make positive changes in the person.